Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to synthesize the world's most critical, sometimes chaotic developments. If you're trying to quickly grasp how cutting-edge science is colliding with, well, some pretty harsh geopolitical realities, you're definitely in the right place.
Absolutely. And today, the contrast it's really striking, isn't it? It genuinely feels like we're covering two entirely different trajectories for humanity. On one hand, you have this incredible push towards, traveling at 20% the speed of light. And on the other, well, we're still deeply entangled in conflicts that feel centuries old, conflicts that predate even the idea of spaceflight.
That exact dynamic, that tension, is really our focus for this extended deep dive. And we're actually going to start not on Earth initially, but out there, with the technological marvel that, frankly, could rewrite human destiny. Scientists have just unveiled a new and apparently feasible method for interstellar travel.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing stuff. We're talking laser-powered light sails, and get this, designed by artificial intelligence. The theory is they could propel a probe towards Alpha Centauri, our nearest star system, potentially within just 2 decades.
2 decades to Alpha Centauri, that's hard to even process.
It really is. It's a monumental leap, potentially moving us from science fiction into, well, attainable science. It completely bypasses the old problem of needing massive amounts of fuel on board.
But as you said, we can't just stay out there dreaming of the stars. The immediate, very difficult reality pulls us right back down. We're looking at a spiraling humanitarian crisis, really serious war crimes allegations surfacing in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And then there's a political gridlock right here in the U.S., with the government shutdown having some really severe consequences.
Exactly. So our mission today, as always, is to try and cut through that sheer volume of information. We're digging into a huge stack of global news, trying to distill what's crucial so you, the listener, can get a clear picture of this shifting landscape, geopolitical, scientific, economic, all of it.
We'll be connecting those threads. From the science pushing us towards Alpha Centauri to the serious legal battles facing institutions like the BBC, and the high-stakes political moves involving President Donald Trump, plus the urgent, sometimes unfortunately violent debates unfolding right now at the COP30 climate summit down in Belém, Brazil.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So let's unpack this critical global moment. We'll start right where the pressure, and sadly the human cost, is arguably highest right now: global geopolitical flashpoints. Okay, let's begin with the Israel-Palestine conflict. We've got some deeply disturbing information coming to light detailing documentation conduct, policy escalations, and just persistent violence. It really cuts across military actions, legal frameworks, and policy decisions.
Yeah, and what's particularly alarming, I think, is a level of detail emerging about the behavior of troops on the ground. And critically, this isn't just external reporting. Some of it is coming from internal sources. There's a recent UK documentary, it's called Breaking Ranks: Inside Israel's War, and it features firsthand accounts directly from Israeli soldiers.
Right, so these aren't abstract allegations from afar. These are soldiers talking about their own experiences.
Exactly. Detailed accounts. They describe, immense psychological stress, really critical ethical dilemmas they faced. And crucially, they laid out serious allegations that look like war crimes. Things like a systematic disregard for civilian life, unnecessary drone strikes, and perhaps most disturbing, the alleged practice of using Palestinians as human shields during operations.
Using human shields. And there was also some shocking language reported, wasn't there?
Yes, the dehumanizing rhetoric they described is just as chilling. Soldiers reportedly referred to Palestinians tactically as mosquitoes. I mean, that kind of language. It points towards a mindset where civilian life is seen as negligible or an obstacle, and that fundamentally undermines any claim to ethical conduct in warfare.
And we have to frame this against the staggering human cost. Reports mention over 69,000 Palestinian deaths over the last 2 years of conflict.
That number itself is almost impossible to comprehend. It underscores the scale of the suffering.
So, these soldiers' accounts, they immediately raise questions about systemic accountability, right? The official line from Israeli authorities is denial of these war crimes allegations.
Yeah.
But the sources we're seeing suggest that internal lawyers within the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, actually warned leadership about evidence of potential war crimes. What does that signify?
Well, it suggests a profound internal conflict, doesn't it? If the IDF's own legal counsel was raising red flags, It implies that the possibility of war crimes was recognized at a pretty high level. It makes it much harder to dismiss these incidents as just, isolated bad apples. It points towards a potential failure of command or maybe a policy environment that didn't adequately enforce international law.
Turning potential ethical breaches into a systemic liability.
Precisely. And that's why this documentary, Breaking Ranks, poses such a significant challenge to the official Israeli narrative of the conflict. It's coming from the inside.
And running parallel to this documentation of conduct on the ground, we're seeing a major legislative escalation within Israel itself. The Knesset, Israel's parliament, has passed the first reading of a really highly controversial bill. It proposes the death penalty for convicted terrorists who have committed deadly attacks against Israelis.
Yeah, this is a hugely contentious move. From the proponents' perspective, they frame it as a necessary measure for national security, an existential one even. They argue it's a crucial deterrent against violent attacks targeting Israeli civilians.
But the opposition is extremely strong, citing both immediate and long-term dangers. What are the core arguments against bringing in capital punishment in this specific context?
Well, critics raise several major points. First, in such a supercharged political environment, there's a real fear the bill could become a tool for politically motivated prosecutions rather than purely about justice. Second, they argue it fundamentally violates core human rights principles against state-sanctioned killing. And third, given the dynamics of the conflict, it would almost certainly disproportionately affect Palestinians.
And the potential fallout.
Potentially catastrophic. Opponents warn that implementing capital punishment could act as a massive trigger, significantly escalating already extreme regional tensions. It could make any future de-escalation efforts nearly impossible. It's a policy choice with potentially immediate and dangerous geopolitical consequences.
So that's the legal and policy side. Now, looking at the day-to-day conflict dynamics, the violence seems to just grind on, even despite declared ceasefires. Analysts have started labeling this pattern of persistent Israeli attacks on Gaza as following a Lebanon pattern. Can you unpack what that means, militarily or strategically?
Sure. The Lebanon pattern, it's a sort of tactical and diplomatic paradox. Sometimes it's euphemistically called no war, no peace. But what it really means in practice is maintaining a state of continuous, low-intensity conflict, limited military operations, sporadic strikes, even when a formal ceasefire is technically supposed to be in place. The strategic aim is usually to keep constant pressure on the opposing side, prevent them from regrouping fully. But the downside is enormous.
It completely undermines the credibility of any ceasefire, right?
Absolutely. And it guarantees continued suffering and instability for the civilian population trapped in the middle. It's a state of perpetual insecurity.
And complicating any moves towards a more stable peace, there are these reports about Hamas fighters apparently trapped in a network of tunnels down in southern Gaza.
Yes, that tunnel network is a core tactical problem right now. Finding a way to deal with those fighters, whether it's surrender, safe passage out, or continued fighting, is a critical and incredibly complex part of any potential ceasefire negotiation. They're reportedly cornered in an area now under Israeli military control. So negotiations about their fate are a major flashpoint that could instantly reignite wider hostilities.
And the violence isn't just contained within Gaza either. We're seeing continuous reports of settler violence and home demolitions over in the West Bank.
That's right. There are reports, for instance, of Israeli settlers ramping up actions against Palestinian villages, causing significant damage to vehicles and property near places like Tulkarm in the West Bank.
And Al Jazeera specifically reported on ongoing demolitions of Palestinian homes in Masafir, also in the West Bank.
Yes, and these actions directly target civilian homes and infrastructure. They raise really severe questions about displacement, about land rights in contested territories. These incidents fuel the narrative, certainly among Palestinians and rights groups, that land annexation and displacement are happening in parallel to the overt military operations in Gaza.
It paints a very bleak picture. Is there any positive movement on the humanitarian front?
There is one potentially positive development. Israel reportedly opened the Zikum crossing, which leads into northern Gaza. The stated intention is to facilitate the flow of urgently needed humanitarian aid, food, medicine into that northern region, which has faced particularly severe shortages. So that's at least one concrete step, though the scale of the need remains immense. #2 Ukraine, corruption, and geopolitical realignments.
Okay, let's shift our focus now towards Eastern Europe. Ukraine is facing a really critical internal challenge, one that potentially threatens the international support it's fought so hard to maintain. We're talking about systemic corruption. The Energoatom corruption scandal seems to be making waves globally.
Yes, this is a huge test for President Zelensky's administration. The investigation is centered on allegations of corruption, specifically a massive kickback scheme involving Energoatom. And Energoatom isn't just any company, it's the state-run nuclear energy company. So this isn't just about stolen funds. It potentially involves critical national energy infrastructure.
And the central figure named in these reports, Timur Mindich. He's not some low-level official, is he?
Not at all. He's described as a close ally, even a former business partner of President Volodymyr Zelensky himself. Some media outlets have actually dubbed him Zelensky's wallet.
Zelensky's wallet, that's quite a label. And he apparently left Ukraine just before the Anti-Corruption Bureau raids.
Reportedly, yes. He allegedly fled the country shortly before the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, known as ANDU, conducted its raids. The timing obviously looks highly suspicious.
So what are the implications here?
Well, analysts are really stressing this point. Zelensky absolutely has to provide a convincing, credible demonstration of accountability and transparency here. International support isn't a blank check. You look at Germany, for example. They've provided something like $9 billion in aid just this year.
9 billion euros. That's huge.
It is. And that funding, along with future support from the US, the EU, and others, it's all contingent on the world believing that Ukraine is genuinely committed to reform, genuinely fighting the kind of systemic corruption that plagued it for decades. This single scandal, if mishandled, could seriously damage the credibility of Ukraine's entire war effort and its plea for continued support.
And this internal challenge is playing out against a backdrop of sharply rising military tensions right across Europe. We're seeing signs of a major geopolitical realignment, even with significant cultural shifts. The change in German policy particularly seems incredibly profound.
Oh, absolutely. You really can't overstate the significance of the shift coming from the Evangelical Church in Germany, the EKD. The EKD represents around 17 million people in Germany. And for decades, since the post-World War II era, it held this foundational commitment to pacifism. It was core to its identity. But in their recent Peace Memorandum 2025, they explicitly abandoned that long-standing pacifist stance.
Wow. So what are they saying now?
They're now declaring that violence can be justified as a response to violence, and the explicit driver for this change is the perceived threat from Russia.
For a major national religious and cultural institution like the EKD to make such a fundamental ethical pivot, what does that signal about the perceived level of danger in Europe right now?
It signals that the perception of threat is, frankly, existential. It normalizes the idea of militarization in a society that, for very understandable historical reasons, deliberately tried to distance itself from military aggression for decades. The EKD's move effectively provides a kind of powerful moral validation for the German government's own decisions to significantly boost its military spending and rearmament programs. It shifts the public conversation from "should we arm" towards "we must arm."
And that sentiment seems to be echoed by political leaders elsewhere in the region. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić issued a pretty stark warning, didn't he?
He did. He warned that the escalating military rearmament happening across Europe, he specifically cited Poland, Romania, and Finland, signals what he believes is an inevitable military confrontation between the West and Russia down the line.
Strong words. And Russia's response. Predictable, perhaps.
Largely, yes. Russia's counter-narrative, voiced by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, is to attribute the entire security crisis to NATO expansion and what they frame as Western aggression. Peskov claimed that Western militarization is actually harming European economies and is just a way to distract from internal EU problems. Russia, of course, maintains it's merely acting defensively.
Meanwhile, the delicate diplomatic dance between the U.S. and Russia continues, especially on nuclear arms control.
That's right. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov publicly urged the U.S. to extend the New START treaty for one more year. New START is basically the last major arms control agreement still standing between the two nuclear superpowers. Its extension is seen as crucial for maintaining at least some level of strategic stability.
Did Lavrov comment on the possibility of a Trump-Putin summit? There were reports of delays.
He did address that. He dismissed Western media reports which claimed that hardline Russian demands were holding up a potential summit between President Trump and President Putin. Lavrov argued those reports were based on a misinterpretation of some draft memo. Whether a summit actually materializes or not, the fact that they're even discussing maintaining nuclear stability amidst such hostility just underscores the terrifying stakes involved here. #3. High-stakes legal and political battles.
Okay, let's bring the focus back to the United States. Domestic politics here are grappling with the fallout from the recent government shutdown, but also some pretty unprecedented legal interventions. While the Senate did manage to pass a bipartisan funding bill to end the shutdown, sending it over to the House, the Supreme Court made a decision with immediate and severe humanitarian consequences.
Yes, this is arguably one of Delve's most impactful and frankly worrying rulings we've seen recently concerning the shutdown's effects. The Supreme Court granted an extension that allowed the Trump administration to withhold $4 billion in food assistance. This is money allocated for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP.
$4 billion in food aid withheld, affecting millions of Americans.
Millions. And what's truly shocking, historically speaking, is that this marks the first time SNAP benefits have been entirely halted in the entire 60-year history of the program.
How did this happen legally? I mean, halting food aid during a shutdown.
Yeah.
What's the precedent here?
Well, the administration's argument essentially was that the funds couldn't be distributed because of the lapse in congressional appropriations during the shutdown. The Supreme Court's extension basically upheld the administration's ability to temporarily halt the aid based on that fiscal argument.
But the precedent,
Yeah.
that seems incredibly concerning.
It is deeply worrying because it effectively weaponizes the mechanism of a government shutdown, which is fundamentally a political dispute against the most vulnerable populations. It makes basic food assistance potentially negotiable during political stalemates. Advocates warned immediately this would push millions into severe hunger almost overnight.
And this intense fiscal battle is run alongside President Trump's ongoing high-stakes legal confrontations, not just with political opponents, but increasingly with the press. He's now taken aim at the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC.
That's right. President Trump is threatening to sue the BBC for a staggering sum, $1 billion. The lawsuit threat stems from editorial decisions the BBC made regarding a documentary that presented a critical depiction of his actions related to the January 6th Capitol riot.
A billion-dollar threat. That's not just a legal challenge. That feels like an attempt to intimidate. Right? And it's already had major consequences within the BBC itself.
Absolutely. The controversy surrounding the documentary and the subsequent legal threat led directly to the resignations of two top figures at the BBC, Director General Tim Davie and the head of news, Deborah Turness.
Wow. The Director General resigned over this.
Yes. And adding to the pressure, the UK's Culture Secretary, Lucy Nandy, publicly urged the BBC to work to restore public trust, following accusations from Trump's legal team about biased editing. This whole saga really reflects a dangerous global trend we're seeing, where powerful political figures use the threat of massive lawsuits, so-called SLAPP suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation to try and undermine, intimidate, and frankly, even decapitate the leadership of independent journalistic institutions.
And we have to remember, this BBC fight is just one front in a broader legal strategy from the president. He's simultaneously asking the Supreme Court to overturn the civil verdict in the E. Jean Carroll case.
Correct.
And he also issued a pretty clear warning to the Supreme Court justices while they were deliberating on his authority to impose sweeping tariffs.
Yes, he's consistently challenging judicial outcomes he disagrees with and actively trying to influence ongoing legal processes. It demonstrates an approach that seems to view the judicial system as just another political battleground, rather than an independent branch of government.
And looking internationally, this tactic, using the judicial system against political opposition, seems tragically widespread right now. We saw several other examples recently.
Yes, the pattern is undeniable and deeply concerning for democratic norms globally. In Gabon, for instance, the former First Lady, Sylvia Bongo, and her son were sentenced in absentia, meaning while not present, to 20 years in prison. The charges were embezzlement and money laundering. However, her son vehemently claims the verdict was entirely politically motivated, orchestrated by the current regime that seized power from his father.
And then there's the situation in Turkey, which seems almost surreal in its scale.
It really does. Istanbul's opposition mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, who's seen as a major potential rival to President Erdogan, is facing a prosecutor's request for an unbelievable sentence: 2,352 years in prison.
2,352 years.
Correct. Over 142 separate alleged offenses. The sentence length is so absurdly disproportionate that its purpose appears transparently political, to legally and politically neutralize a potent dissenting voice. İmamoğlu supporters view it as a naked attempt to crush democratic opposition.
And a similar dynamic, though a different charge, in Algeria.
Yes, raising serious human rights concerns there too.
The pro-democracy poet Mohammad Tajidi was recently jailed for 5 years on terrorism charges. His supporters argue the charges are baseless and simply punishment for his support of the Iraq pro-democracy movement.
So Gabon, Turkey, Algeria. It seems like a playbook.
It does. These aren't just isolated incidents. They represent a worrying global trend of democratic backsliding, where the institutions of law are increasingly being weaponized as political sledgehammers to silence dissent.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and pivot. I mean, pivot 180 degrees, away from conflict, legal battles, and repression, towards pure, almost unbridled scientific potential. We'll start with that breakthrough we mentioned at the top, the one that has scientists genuinely buzzing. This new concept for an interstellar drive.
Yes, this is truly exciting stuff. Scientists have unveiled a new method, they say a feasible method, for constructing an interstellar drive. It relies on advanced laser propulsion technology, coupled with highly sophisticated light sails designed using artificial intelligence. This feels like the culmination of decades of theoretical physics potentially becoming practical engineering.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics. How does this actually work? Powerful lasers, light sails.
Right. So the core idea involves utilizing incredibly powerful laser beams, likely based on Earth or maybe in Earth orbit. Imagine beams potentially several miles across. These beams shine onto these ultra-lightweight, highly reflective sails. Materials like graphene are often discussed. The sheer pressure from the photons in the laser beam is enough to push the sail.
Just the pressure of light itself, and the speeds they're talking about achieving.
This is the mind-bending part. They're talking about potentially accelerating these sails up to 20% the speed of light. 20%.
Wow. Okay, put that in perspective for us. Alpha Centauri.
Right. Our closest neighboring star system, Alpha Centauri, is about 4.37 light years away. With traditional chemical rockets, like the ones that took us to the moon, that journey would take tens of thousands of years. It's effectively impossible for a human mission. But at 20% the speed of light, that journey could potentially be made in around 2 decades, maybe slightly longer to decelerate at the other end, but still, it completely revolutionizes the timescale for interstellar exploration.
It really does. It brings it into the realm of possibility within a generation, or at least for robotic probes initially. But you mentioned AI is crucial here. It's not just about the laser power.
No, the AI component is absolutely essential. The real technical challenge isn't just generating the laser power, it's designing a light sail that can actually survive being pushed that hard.
Survive. What are the dangers?
Think about it. When you accelerate a very thin sail to 20% of the speed of light, it faces unimaginable physical stresses. There's the intense heat from the laser itself, potential radiation damage in deep space, and critically, the impact risk from even tiny particles of interstellar dust at those speeds could be catastrophic, like hitting a microscopic bullet.
So how does AI help?
AI is used to optimize the structure and the material composition of the light sail, potentially down to the nanoscale. It runs countless simulations to figure out the best way to maximize propulsion efficiency while ensuring the sail maintains its integrity. It needs to be strong enough not to tear, reflective enough to catch the laser light effectively, and durable enough to withstand the journey without, vaporizing or shredding. It's an incredibly complex, multivariable optimization problem, likely too complex for human engineers to solve completely on their own.
So the AI is essentially the super engineer making sure the light sail doesn't just disintegrate under the immense pressure and harsh conditions.
Exactly. And this whole concept, which is being explored under initiatives, sometimes called things like Project Dragonfly or Breakthrough Starshot, it tackles the fundamental barrier of traditional rocketry.
Which is the tyranny of the rocket equation, right? Where most of the rocket's weight is just fuel needed to lift the fuel.
Precisely. By getting rid of the need for onboard fuel and pushing the spacecraft remotely with light, you can make the probe itself incredibly small and light, maybe just the sail and a tiny payload with sensors. And when the mass is that low, you can achieve speeds that were, until recently, purely the stuff of science fiction novels. #tag to astronomical wonders in space programs.
Okay, so that's the far future, potentially. Closer to home, in our own galactic neighborhood, astronomers are also making discoveries that are forcing us to redraw our maps of the cosmos. They've been using data from NASA's exoplanet hunting spacecraft, NASA, of course, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to take a fresh look at a very familiar site, the Pleiades star cluster.
Yes, the famous Seven Sisters. It's one of the most easily recognizable star clusters in our night sky. And the new findings suggest it could be vastly larger than we previously thought.
How much larger?
Potentially up to 20 times larger in extent.
20 times. How could astronomers have misjudged its size by that much? It seems like such a well-studied object.
Well, our previous estimates relied heavily on observations in visible light and assumptions about which stars were gravitationally bound together based on their apparent proximity in the sky. But these newer analyses likely incorporate data from other wavelengths, perhaps infrared, which can pierce through dust clouds. They also use much more precise measurements of stellar motion or proper motion over time. This allows astronomers to identify stars that are much further out from the core cluster but are still moving through space with it, meaning they are gravitationally part of the same group.
So stars we thought were just in the background are actually part of the family.
Essentially, yes. It dramatically extends the cluster's boundaries and shows that even familiar celestial objects can hold huge surprises when we look at them with new tools and techniques. Our cosmic backyard is still revealing secrets.
And speaking of cosmic phenomena affecting us directly, Earth's atmosphere recently put on quite a show, thanks to our sun. We had a severe G4 geomagnetic storm.
We did. That G4 storm, which is considered a severe level on the space weather scale, was responsible for triggering widespread displays of the northern lights, the aurora borealis. They were visible across huge areas of North America, much further south than usual. Reports mention sightings as far south as Mexico, which is quite rare.
How does that happen? What causes such widespread auroras?
It's all driven by activity on the sun. In this case, it was likely caused by high-speed solar winds, possibly combined with one or more coronal mass ejections, CMEs. These are massive eruptions of plasma and magnetic field from the sun's outer atmosphere. When these charged particles slam into Earth's magnetosphere, our planet's magnetic shield, they funnel down toward the poles and interact with gases in the upper atmosphere, oxygen and nitrogen mostly.
And that interaction makes the gases glow.
Exactly. The energy exchange excites the atmospheric gases, causing them to emit light, creating those beautiful shifting curtains of green, pink, and sometimes other colors. It was a spectacular sight for millions of people. The forecast even predicted potential visibility in the northern UK, particularly Scotland and maybe northern England. A really powerful and beautiful reminder of space weather and our connection to the sun.
And while we're talking space, we saw a significant milestone achieved by another national space program. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, successfully tested a critical component for its upcoming human spaceflight mission.
Yes, they conducted a crucial test of the parachute system for their Gaganyaan astronaut capsule.
Parachutes seem simple, but for bringing astronauts home, they're absolutely vital, aren't they?
Oh, completely pivotal. There's very little room for error. Ensuring the safe, soft landing and recovery of the crew capsule upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere is paramount for astronaut safety. This successful parachute system test demonstrates ISRO's technical capability in this critical area. It's a massive step forward for the Gaganyaan program and brings India much closer to becoming only the fourth nation in the world capable of launching its own astronauts into orbit and returning them safely to Earth.
Okay, let's bring our focus back down to Earth again, specifically to technology. The sheer excitement around artificial intelligence, AI, is fueling absolutely massive market valuations. But there are growing whispers, maybe even shouts, that the whole AI boom might be inflating into a financial bubble.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of concern about that. The worry is rooted in the incredible demands that current AI development places on resources. We're talking vast amounts of cash for R&D and hardware, huge amounts of energy for computation, and massive data sets for training. Some analysts are pointing to market indicators that suggest the current surge in AI-related stock prices might be driven more by speculative frenzy than by solid fundamentals.
What kind of indicators?
Well, look at some Asian markets, for example. The Hong Kong Hang Seng Index saw gains recently, but reports indicated those gains were overwhelmingly driven by just 6 huge tech companies with significant AI investments.
Only 6 companies driving the whole index.
Largely, yes. That kind of narrow market leadership is often seen as a classic warning sign of speculative overheating. The gains aren't broad-based across the economy.
And we saw a ripple effect when SoftBank, a major tech investor, sold some of its Nvidia shares, didn't we? That seemed to spook the market.
It did. That SoftBank sale was significant because Nvidia is widely seen as, the poster child for the AI hardware boom. When a major influential investor like SoftBank appears to be taking some profits or de-risking its position in the sector's leader, it sends a signal. It makes other investors question whether the current sky-high valuations are sustainable. Is this the peak? Or is there still solid growth ahead?
The market seems increasingly wary that the current investment surge might be more hype than robust long-term value, especially outside those top few giant companies.
But even amidst these bubble fears, the actual technological innovation continues at pace. We're seeing what could be a major advancement in sensor technology, specifically for autonomous systems like self-driving cars.
Yes, this involves a company called Teradar. They've secured significant funding, $150 million, to develop a new type of sensor. This sensor operates in the terahertz region of the electromagnetic spectrum, which sits between microwaves and infrared light. And their claim is pretty radical.
What are they claiming?
They claim their terahertz sensor can essentially beat both LiDAR and traditional radar at their own games, while offering a crucial advantage: all-weather functionality.
Okay, break that down. LiDAR gives good resolution. Radar works well in bad weather, but lower resolution. How does terahertz supposedly beat both?
So, LiDAR uses lasers to create detailed 3D maps, giving excellent resolution, but it struggles badly in rain, snow, or fog because the light gets scattered. Radar penetrates weather easily and gives good range detection, but its resolution isn't fine enough to distinguish small objects clearly. Teradar claims the technology offers high resolution, similar to LiDAR, and excellent range, like radar, plus it can operate effectively regardless of weather conditions: rain, snow, fog, dust.
And that all-weather capability is the key weakness of current LiDAR systems for self-driving cars, right?
It's the absolute Achilles heel. You can't have truly autonomous vehicles, level 4 or level 5, that suddenly become unsafe or have to stop driving the moment it starts raining or snowing heavily. That's just not viable. If Teradar can actually deliver on its promise of a single sensor that provides high-resolution, long-range perception in all conditions, it would be a massive breakthrough. It could potentially remove that fundamental safety barrier and completely reshape the competitive landscape for sensors in autonomous vehicles, robotics, drones, you name it.
That confidence in the future of autonomy is also showing up in the logistics sector. We saw news about Einride, the Swedish startup. They're known for those futuristic-looking autonomous electric trucks, the ATs or Einride pods.
Right, the ones without a driver's cab at all. They're planning to go public soon.
How are they doing that?
They're planning to list via a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. This move signals significant confidence, both from Einride and their investors, that the market is ready to embrace the idea of remote-operated, fully driverless logistics vehicles. They're betting that the future of freight transportation is electric and autonomous, and they're seeking major capital to scale up, potentially targeting a valuation over $5 billion. It shows a strong belief that AI-driven trucking is moving from concept to commercial reality.
But sometimes that confident stride towards the future hits a small bump, or maybe just falls over. We saw a slightly less glamorous moment for robotics recently in Russia.
Slight chuckle. Yes, there was that moment. Russia unveiled its first highly publicized anthropomorphic robot, a humanoid robot. And unfortunately for the presenters, just seconds after it was unveiled on stage, it all just tipped over.
Oh dear, a bit embarrassing.
A bit, yes. But it's also a perfect, almost comical visual reminder, isn't it? For all the incredible advances in AI software and algorithms and all the talk of robotic dominance, the physical, real-world engineering challenges of creating stable, balanced, complex robots that can navigate unpredictable environments are still really, really substantial. Things like walking and maintaining balance, which humans do without thinking, are still incredibly hard problems for robotics, even for these supposedly revolutionary machines. It keeps the hype in check, maybe? Hashtag tag border. Cyber threats and digital governance. Okay, moving from physical stumbles to the invisible threats in the digital realm. Cyber threats are increasingly being linked explicitly to geopolitical aims, specifically espionage and potential sabotage. Australia's intelligence chief, Mike Burgess, the head of ASO, Australian Security Intelligence Organization, issued a very stark and detailed warning recently about Chinese state-sponsored hackers.
What was the core message?
Burgess stated very clearly that hacker groups linked to the Chinese government and military are actively probing critical Australian infrastructure networks. We're talking about telecommunications, transportation systems, energy grids.
Probing, as in looking for weaknesses.
Exactly. But Burgess stressed a crucial shift in motive. He said it's no longer just about espionage, stealing information, intellectual property, government secrets, which has been happening for years. The concern now is that they are actively mapping these critical systems and identifying vulnerabilities specifically to prepare for potential future sabotage operations.
Sabotage, meaning they could try to disrupt or shut down essential services.
That's the explicit warning. to gain the capability to disrupt or disable critical infrastructure power, water, communications, transport potentially in the lead up to or during a future conflict or period of heightened tension. Burgess described it as a shift from intelligence gathering to actively preparing the battlefield in cyberspace. It signals a really serious escalation in the potential use of state-sponsored cyber capabilities for offensive purposes.
That's chilling. And this kind of aggressive digital posture seems to mirror how digital platforms themselves can become entangled in geopolitical disputes, doesn't it? We saw an issue with Google Maps recently.
Yes, Google found itself having to clarify a sensitive border issue concerning its Maps application. There were claims circulating that Google had removed the borderline separating Western Sahara from Morocco on its maps.
Did they remove it?
Google denied removing it. Their clarification was more nuanced. They stated that the borderline was actually never displayed to users viewing the map from within Morocco. While seemingly a small technical point, the situation highlights the immense, often subtle, power that digital platforms like Google Maps wield over geopolitical perception. The visibility, or deliberate non-visibility, of a borderline on a widely used digital map can carry significant diplomatic weight. It can be interpreted as endorsing one side's territorial claims and can easily feed into nationalistic narratives and ongoing disputes. It shows how code becomes political territory.
Interesting. And finally, on a much more mundane but still relevant, Digital Shift Ryanair, the huge European budget airline, is making a change to its boarding process.
Yes, they're transitioning to a fully digital boarding pass system. They plan to completely eliminate printed paper boarding passes.
So everyone needs a smartphone or tablet.
Essentially, yes. It's framed as a move to streamline operations, speed up boarding, and also align with environmental sustainability goals by reducing paper waste. It represents that ongoing subtle shift where essential travel functions become entirely reliant on personal digital devices, placing the onus of having a charged working smartphone squarely on the passenger. Convenience for the airline, potentially a point of stress for some travelers.
All right, let's shift our focus now to arguably the overarching challenge that affects every single nation and sector on the planet, the climate crisis. We turn our attention to the recent COP30 summit, the UN climate conference, held this time in Belém, Brazil. And the start of the summit saw some dramatic clashes between global negotiations and grassroots activism.
It really did. The scene was quite volatile early on. Indigenous protesters actually forcibly entered the main COP30 summit venue, leading to clashes with the UN security guards. This demonstration wasn't just random disruption. It was fueled by deep, long-standing frustration over what they see as governmental inaction on issues critical to their survival and the planet's health.
What were their specific demands?
They were very direct and clear. They demanded urgent, concrete action against deforestation and mineral extraction happening within their ancestral territories, often illegally or without proper consultation. And they stressed the fundamental need for clear land demarcation policies.
Why is land demarcation, legally defining the boundaries of indigenous territories, so central to this fight and even to global climate action?
It's absolutely crucial for several reasons. Firstly, study after study shows that lands managed by indigenous communities are among the most effective, most biodiverse carbon sinks left on Earth. They hold vast amounts of carbon in forests and soil. Organizations like API, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, argue forcefully that protecting their territories is protecting the Amazon rainforest, and by extension, helping stabilize the global climate. Land demarcation provides the legal and political tool they need to assert their rights and physically protect their lands from illegal loggers, miners, and encroaching agribusinesses often succeeding where governments fail or lack the will to enforce conservation laws. It directly links human rights to ecological preservation.
So it's about both land rights and climate action.
Exactly. They're inextricably linked in this context.
Now, beyond the protests, the financial discussions at COP30 were also incredibly fraught, weren't they? There was criticism about who wasn't there and big questions about the money actually pledged.
Yes, politically, California Governor Gavin Newsom publicly criticized President Trump's absence from the high-level segments of the conference, suggesting a lack of U.S. leadership commitment at the highest level. But the really stark issue was the funding gap. A new loss and damage fund was officially launched at COP30, which sounds positive, but the initial pledges amounted to only about $250 million.
$250 million for a global fund sounds small.
It's vanishingly small compared to the scale of the need. Climate activists and representatives from developing nations estimate that the countries suffering the worst impacts of climate change, impacts they largely didn't cause, need somewhere between $200 billion and $400 billion every single year just to cope with the current and future damages, loss and damage.
So $250 million pledged versus 200, 400 billion needed annually.
Precisely. We're talking about a gap of hundreds of billions of dollars every year. The current pledges are seen as largely symbolic, nowhere near the scale required for climate justice or effective adaptation in vulnerable nations.
And complicating the efforts to create effective climate policy is this persistent problem of lobbying and disinformation, particularly from the fossil fuel industry.
Yes, this remains a huge obstacle. Reports continue to highlight how fossil fuel lobbyists often attend these climate summits in large numbers, sometimes even outnumbering the official delegations from entire climate-vulnerable nations. And there are widespread concerns that they utilize sophisticated disinformation campaigns to sow doubt about climate science, promote delay tactics, and obstruct policies that would genuinely phase out fossil fuels.
Creating confusion and pushing false solutions.
Exactly. That creates an environment where potentially counterproductive ideas can gain traction. For example, Brazil's President Lula, hosting the summit, called for an end to fossil fuels, which was welcomed. But he simultaneously endorsed so-called sustainable fuels. Critics immediately pointed out the risk here. Many biofuels, for instance, while sounding green, can actually exacerbate deforestation if they require clearing vast tracts of forest or other ecosystems to grow the necessary monoculture crops like soy or sugarcane.
So it could just shift the environmental damage elsewhere.
Potentially, yes. It can distract from the core need for genuine decarbonization through massive investment in renewable energy infrastructure, solar, wind, geothermal, and electrification of transport and industry. These sustainable fuels risk being false solutions that delay real action. #2 dire climate warnings and global progress.
Against this backdrop of political maneuvering and funding gaps, the scientific community continues to sound the alarm, arguably louder than ever. A NASA scientist recently reiterated a prediction made decades ago.
Yes, a 37-year-old prediction warning that humanity has effectively reached a point of no return regarding certain aspects of climate change.
A point of no return. What does that mean practically?
It means that even if we were to magically stop all greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, the warming effects already baked into the Earth's climate system due to decades of past emissions absorbing heat, particularly in the oceans, are now largely irreversible on human timescales. The scientist referred to climate change as a sleeping giant that we have now fully awakened. We are now forced to deal with adaptation to unavoidable changes, alongside the urgent need to prevent further, even more catastrophic warming. Prevention of all change is no longer on the table.
That's a truly sobering assessment. And it hangs heavy over the recent review looking back at the first decade of the Paris Agreement. What did that review find?
Well, the headline finding is stark. Global emissions are still rising. They hit record levels again recently, driven mostly by a relatively small number of major economies. The last decade was unequivocally the hottest ever recorded globally.
So not on track then.
Definitely not on track for the Paris goals. However, the review wasn't entirely devoid of positive signs. There are specific sectors where progress has actually exceeded expectations. Renewables, specifically solar power, wind power, and the adoption of electric vehicles, EVs, have seen tremendous growth, much faster than many projections anticipated a decade ago. Renewables now provide around 40% of global electricity generation.
40% is significant progress.
It is. It shows that rapid technological transitions are possible when policies and investment align. But the overall scientific consensus remains absolutely clear. If we want any chance of limiting global warming to the critical threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we need a profound acceleration of efforts. And that includes, most notably, a rapid, managed, and complete phase-out of coal power globally, along with significant reductions in oil and gas use. The pace needs to increase dramatically.
And we're seeing the tangible impacts of these climate shifts creating severe environmental stress in critical regions around the world, aren't we?
Absolutely. The Congo rainforest, for example, often called one of the lungs of the Earth alongside the Amazon, is a vital global carbon sink. But it's facing severe and immediate threats from accelerating deforestation, illegal logging, and largely unregulated mining operations, putting that critical ecosystem at risk.
And water scarcity is emerging as a major source of instability.
Hugely so.
Iran, for instance, is currently grappling with what's being described as an unprecedented water crisis. This is linked directly to the impacts of climate change, changing rainfall patterns, prolonged droughts. But it's severely compounded by decades of inadequate and unsustainable water management practices. This environmental stress fuels social and political unrest.
And even in major agricultural regions like the U.S. Midwest, the impacts are being felt.
Yes, farmers in the American Midwest are dealing with severe drought conditions right now. This is directly impacting crop yields, particularly for key commodities like soybeans. And it's not just the harvest. The drought has knock-on effects. Low water levels in major rivers, like the Mississippi, are complicating transport logistics, making it harder and more expensive to move grain and other agricultural goods to market via barges. It shows how interconnected these systems are. #3. Extreme weather and disaster aftermath. And of course, climate change is widely understood to be fueling more frequent and intense extreme weather events, forcing proactive and reactive measures globally. We saw Taiwan recently having to evacuate over 8,300 residents and shut down schools as Tropical Storm Fenghuang approached its shores. Preparation is key.
And down in the Caribbean, there was a major infrastructure failure that highlighted vulnerability. The Dominican Republic experienced a complete nationwide power outage.
Yes, a total blackout across the country. Officials described it as resulting from a cascade of failures within their national electrical grid. This incident immediately set off serious alarm bells about the fragility of aging infrastructure, not just there, but in many countries. It underscores the urgent need for significant investment in upgrading power grids to make them more resilient, especially in the face of increasingly frequent and severe storms and other climate-related stresses.
And finally, looking at the aftermath of disasters, how aid is managed often becomes a critical test of government effectiveness and integrity. The U.S. announced more aid for Jamaica following Hurricane Melissa.
That's right. The U.S. pledged an additional $10 million, bringing their total commitment for Jamaica's recovery to $22 million.
But this announcement was met with some significant concerns, wasn't it? Particularly around transparency from the Jamaican government.
Yes, critics immediately raised strong concerns about the Jamaican government's perceived lack of transparency and delays in detailing exactly how previously allocated aid funds have been spent and what oversight mechanisms are in place.
The information minister promised details would be provided at an appropriate time, but given past criticisms about inadequate oversight, what does that kind of response signal?
Well, to critics, it signals a potential lack of accountability. Delays in providing clear, detailed accounting inevitably undermine public trust. There's always the concern that without robust, transparent oversight, vital aid funds could be misused, diverted, or simply not reach the most vulnerable communities who need it most.
So there are strong calls for real-time reporting and independent oversight.
Exactly. To ensure that disaster aid functions as genuine relief and recovery support, rather than becoming entangled in political maneuvering or potential corruption. Transparency is absolutely key for aid effectiveness.
Okay, let's pivot now to the economy, focusing on those pocketbook issues that affect people directly, but also the larger structural shifts we're seeing. The current global economy seems almost defined by this stark contrast. Incredible wealth accumulation at the very top, alongside growing strain pretty much everywhere else.
And that polarization is really one of the most defining and I think concerning features of the modern global economy. A recent report, I believe it was from Oxfam, highlighted this dramatically. It found that the top 10 wealthiest individuals in the United States saw their collective net worth increase by nearly $700 billion in just the past year.
$700 billion for just 10 people. That number is almost difficult to comprehend. What's driving that massive consolidation of wealth?
It's a combination of factors. Favorable economic conditions, particularly significant asset inflation, think soaring stock prices, especially in tech, and rising property values have played a huge role. This is compounded by tax policies in many countries that tend to disproportionately benefit high net worth individuals and corporations, allowing the ultra-wealthy to accumulate and compound their assets at an exponential rate compared to average wage earners. It's creating levels of wealth inequality that many economists warn are becoming socially and economically destabilizing.
And meanwhile, for the average person and many businesses in the U.S., the economy is showing multiple signs of significant strain.
Yes, several indicators are pointing towards mounting pressure. Inflation, for instance, has reportedly been rising for 5 consecutive months now, raising concerns about the effectiveness of recent economic management policies and eroding purchasing power for consumers.
And businesses are feeling it too.
Definitely, particularly smaller businesses. Reports indicate that U.S. bankruptcies grew by double digits, something like 12% year over year in October. That's a significant jump. And alongside formal bankruptcies, we're seeing anecdotal and data-driven evidence of a noticeable increase in going out of business trends among small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. These are often the backbone of local economies, so their struggles are a worrying sign.
And a key indicator for consumer confidence in retailers' outlook is always holiday hiring. What are the projections looking like for this year?
They're looking quite weak, actually. Projections suggest that retail hiring for the crucial holiday season is expected to be the lowest it's been since the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. The forecast is somewhere between 265,000 and 365,000 seasonal hires nationwide.
That's a big drop from typical years. What does that signal?
It signals significant caution from retailers. They seem to be anticipating a slowdown in consumer spending due to inflation and general economic uncertainty. They're hesitant to take on large numbers of temporary staff. And layered on top of this, there's a growing concern, particularly for younger Americans entering the workforce. They're facing dwindling job prospects in some sectors. And increasingly, competition from AI and automation for entry-level administrative and customer service roles that historically served as the first rungs on the economic ladder.
Adding another layer of structural weakness is this situation in commercial real estate. We keep hearing about problems there.
Yes, the commercial real estate sector, particularly office buildings in major urban centers, is facing a serious crisis. Office vacancy rates continue to increase sharply. This is obviously being exacerbated by the persistence of remote and hybrid work trends that took hold during the pandemic and seem to be sticking. It signals a potentially massive, maybe even permanent transformation in how and where white-collar work gets done.
And this isn't just about empty offices. It has major financial implications.
Huge financial implications. Companies that own large portfolios of office buildings, like Office Properties Income Trust, OPI, which has been mentioned in reports, are facing severe financial turmoil. The value of their core assets is plummeting. And this creates a significant risk for the financial sector more broadly because billions of dollars in loans backed by these office properties are held by banks, particularly regional banks. Widespread defaults could trigger serious instability. It's definitely a sector to watch closely. #TAG2, the NYC progressive wave and Wall Street response.
Okay, staying in the U.S., but shifting to local politics, although with national implications. A pretty significant political shift just occurred in New York City, the financial capital of the country. Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani won the mayoral race.
Yes, this is being widely interpreted as a massive symbolic victory for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and a real shift away from the more moderate, centrist Democratic candidates who have typically held the mayor's office in New York City for decades.
And the reaction from the city's financial elite, from Wall Street, was immediate and intense, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely furious. Reports indicate that Wall Street-aligned billionaires and associated groups spent upwards of $40 million in an attempt to defeat Mamdani.
$40 million on a local mayoral race. Why such immense financial pushback against this one candidate?
It's largely about the precedent. Mamdani ran and won on a platform explicitly focused on tackling deep issues of affordability and social equity in the city. And his plan to fund these initiatives relies heavily on substantial tax increases targeting high earners and large corporations. Wall Street fears that if these kinds of explicitly redistributive policies are implemented successfully in New York City, arguably the most important global financial hub, it could validate and embolden similar progressive economic agendas across the country. They were fighting to prevent that blueprint from gaining legitimacy.
President Trump certainly weighed in, characterizing Mamdani as a communist lunatic. It instantly became a nationally charged issue.
It did. And now Wall Street leaders, and the city's corporate sector more broadly, are forced to reckon with an incoming mayoral administration that seems genuinely committed to fundamentally altering the city's financial relationship with its wealthiest residents and businesses. The big ongoing debate now will be about the feasibility. Can Mamdani deliver on his ambitious promises regarding affordability and social programs without, as his critics claim, damaging the city's economic competitiveness and potentially driving businesses and high earners away? That tension between equity and financial stability is now front and center in NYC politics. #TAG3 UK domestic policy and finance.
Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic to the UK. The government there is also navigating some really significant domestic financial pressures and difficult policy choices, particularly concerning the National Health Service, the NHS.
Yes, the NHS in England is under immense strain. The Treasury recently had to approve a kind of compromise deal that effectively allows the NHS England to overspend its budget for the current year. But this wasn't a simple bailout. The immediate and really painful consequence tied to this fiscal arrangement is a reported £1 billion payoff plan. And that plan will directly lead to the loss of thousands of NHS staff jobs.
Thousands of jobs cut from the NHS, even as it's allowed to overspend. That seems counterintuitive.
It is a difficult trade-off. It appears to be a short-term measure to manage immediate budget pressures, possibly by offering voluntary redundancies or not filling vacancies. But the clear outcome is a reduction in workforce capacity. Critics argue this is incredibly short-sighted, creating short-term fiscal relief at the cost of exacerbating long-term staffing shortages in critical healthcare services, which will likely lead to longer waiting times and poorer patient care down the line.
And meanwhile, the UK government is also grappling with a major fairness issue related to state pensions, specifically affecting women born in the 1950s.
That's right. This is the long-running WASPI campaign issue, Women Against State Pension Inequality. The government is now reconsidering providing compensation to millions of women who argue they were not adequately informed far enough in advance about significant changes made to their state pension age. These changes meant they had to wait years longer than expected to receive their state pension, causing significant financial hardship for many. The situation arose after major legal challenges and sustained public outcry. It highlights a critical failure in government policy communication and the real-world financial uncertainty imposed on people nearing retirement. It's become a massive issue of social equity and trust.
And on a different note, we saw a proactive policy proposal from one of the opposition parties, the Liberal Democrats, aimed at helping a specific sector that's been struggling.
Yes, they proposed a targeted measure to stimulate the UK's hospitality sector, pubs, restaurants, cafes, which has been hit really hard by the combination of high inflation, rising energy costs, and lingering effects from the pandemic. Their proposal is for a temporary cut in the value-added tax, VAT, rate from the standard 20% down to 5% specifically for food and drink sold in hospitality venues.
A 5% VAT rate. How would they fund that tax cut?
This is the politically interesting part. They propose financing this VAT cut through a windfall tax levied on the recent large profits made by major banks. So they're explicitly framing it as a way to shift some of the financial burden away from struggling local pubs and restaurants onto the highly profitable financial sector. It's designed to appeal as both pro-business for small hospitality and fair in terms of taxing excess profits. Hashtag tax for shifting global markets.
Okay, looking now at the broader global economic stage, we're seeing some major companies making significant strategic shifts in response to changing regional economic dynamics. Vale SA, the huge Brazilian mining company, is one example.
Yes. Vale, one of the world's largest producers of iron ore, is making a very deliberate strategic pivot to increase its focus on India's steel market.
Why India specifically?
It's a calculated move away from their traditional reliance on China, which has long been the world's dominant consumer of raw materials like iron ore, but whose economic growth is slowing. Vale is predicting that demand for iron ore in India could potentially double in the coming years. This is being driven by India's massive infrastructure development plans, rapid urbanization, and growing manufacturing sector. Vale is essentially betting big that India will be the next major engine of global growth for steel production and consumption, and they want to be positioned to supply that market. It's a major strategic reorientation based on forecasts of future demand.
Interesting. Now, shifting to the intersection of high-performance sports and high finance, the financial value of Formula One, F1 racing just seems to keep accelerating to the stratosphere.
It really does. We saw news that Toto Wolff, the highly successful team principal and co-owner of the Mercedes F1 team, is currently negotiating the potential sale of a portion of his stake in the team.
And the reported valuation of the Mercedes F1 team is staggering.
Absolutely staggering. The team is reportedly being valued at around $4.6 billion. That's roughly $5.8 billion US dollars.
For a racing team.
For a racing team. That incredible valuation really underscores how F1 has transformed itself in recent years. It's moved beyond just being a sport. It's become an elite, highly lucrative global entertainment platform and a very attractive financial investment asset. This is driven by booming global television and streaming rights deals, increased fan engagement, particularly in new markets like the US, sponsorship revenue, and the budget cap rules, which aim to make teams more financially sustainable and profitable.
And finally, let's look at the increasingly fierce competition in the electric vehicle EV market. Chinese manufacturers are making serious inroads, particularly in Europe.
Yes, the dynamics are shifting rapidly. BYD, the Chinese auto giant, is reporting rapidly growing sales figures in Europe, significantly narrowing the sales gap that Tesla has traditionally enjoyed there. The competition is heating up fast.
How are the established players like Tesla and Volkswagen responding to this increased pressure from Chinese brands?
They're responding with different strategies. Tesla, interestingly, announced plans to debut its much-anticipated robo-taxi service concept at the upcoming Shanghai Import Expo. This move serves two purposes. It shows Tesla's continued commitment to the crucial Chinese market despite growing local competition, and it emphasizes their future focus on autonomous driving technology as a key differentiator.
And Volkswagen, what's their approach?
Volkswagen is taking a more hardware-focused strategic approach within China. They announced plans to start manufacturing their own advanced semiconductors directly in China.
VW making its own chips, specifically in China. Why that move?
It seems to be about strategic self-sufficiency and localization. The global chip shortages over the past few years highlighted the extreme vulnerability of automakers relying on complex, distant supply chains for these critical components. By manufacturing advanced chips locally in China, chips designed specifically for its next-generation EVs and semi-autonomous driving systems, VW gains several advantages. They get more control over their supply chain, potentially reducing costs and avoiding future shortages. They can ensure the chips are perfectly optimized for their vehicles. And critically, it helps them compete more effectively head-to-head with those rising Chinese EV brands, which are themselves rapidly localizing their technology and supply chains. It's a move to build resilience and competitiveness directly within the world's largest auto market.
All right, we're heading into our final segment now, where we'll dive into some important stories around justice systems, some really unexpected scientific breakthroughs, and how cultural and sporting legacies are being shaped right now. Let's start with a deeply concerning case from South Asia, detailing not just a terror attack, but the investigation into the radicalization network behind it.
Yes, this involves the investigation into the tragic car explosion near the Red Fort in Delhi, India, which reportedly killed at least 12 people. Authorities have been hunting for a specific vehicle, a red Ford EcoSport, believed to have been used in the attack. But the really chilling part is what the investigation has reportedly uncovered about the suspects. A direct link to a network of highly educated medical professionals.
Medical professionals involved in terrorism.
Apparently so. One central figure named is a Dr. Umar Nabi, who authorities say is connected to the Pakistan-based terrorist organization Jaish-e-Mohammed, or Jemen. And crucially, the investigation seems to have traced the specific radicalization pathway used by these doctors.
How were they radicalized?
According to the reports, it happened primarily through two specific closed groups on the messaging app Telegram. This case serves as a really horrifying model of modern extremism. These medical professionals initially joined or participated in Telegram groups discussing legitimate political grievances, specifically focusing on the situation and alleged oppression in Kashmir. However, within two particular groups, one named Farzamdan Idarul Ulum, Deoband, and another reportedly led by a known GEM operative named Umar bin Khattab, the conversation allegedly shifted rapidly. It moved from discussing grievances to embracing a narrative of global jihad and advocating for violent retaliation.
So using encrypted platforms like Telegram to target professionals?
Exactly. The apparent use of closed, encrypted digital platforms like Telegram to facilitate the rapid radicalization of highly educated professionals poses enormous new challenges for security services. It's much harder to track and infiltrate than traditional methods, and it shows how extremist ideologies can quickly take root even among unexpected demographics. #TAG2, justice system failures, and public safety.
We also need to address instances where justice systems themselves seem to be failing operationally. There were some alarming figures released recently in England and Wales.
Yes, government figures revealed that since April, over 90 prisoners have been accidentally released from prison due to administrative errors, simple mistakes in paperwork or process.
Over 90 people accidentally released. That seems incredibly high.
It is an alarming failure rate. It raises really significant concerns about the operational integrity, the accuracy, and maybe the sheer pressure and under-resourcing within the prison and court administrative systems. Every single one of those accidental releases represents, at minimum, a serious procedural failure and potentially a direct, avoidable risk to public safety, depending on the individual released. It suggests parts of the system might be buckling under administrative strain.
Meanwhile, law enforcement continues to grapple with the persistent and difficult issue of online child exploitation and predation.
Yes, unfortunately, these cases continue to surface. We saw reports of the sentencing of an online predator named Lipscomb in one case. In another, charges were filed against 7 men allegedly involved in a child sexual exploitation probe that identified 11 victims. These cases serve as stark reminders of the ongoing, necessary, and often difficult fight that law enforcement and child protection agencies face in combating these kinds of digital harms against children.
And shifting to the international stage, the United Nations is heavily involved in trying to address accountability and humanitarian crises in several conflict zones.
That's right. The UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, their aid chief, recently arrived in Sudan for what was described as a critical mission. This comes amidst escalating humanitarian needs and deep fears of widespread violence. Reports mentioned a hospital worker in El Fasher, a city in Darfur, describing the situation there as a state of continuous terror, highlighting the extreme danger faced by civilians and aid workers.
And separately, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, made a strong call regarding recent events in Tanzania.
Yes, Turk called for a formal, independent investigation into reports that hundreds of people were allegedly killed during unrest following recent elections in Tanzania.
Hundreds killed. And there were concerns about evidence tampering.
Yes. The UN intervention is particularly critical here because there were disturbing reports suggesting that police may have attempted to conceal evidence, potentially by moving bodies from mortuaries to hide the true scale of the killings. Turk is pushing hard to ensure that any evidence of potential police brutality or mass killings is preserved and investigated impartially, seeking accountability in what appears to be a very fragile and tense political climate in Tanzania. #3. Unexpected scientific insights and health advances.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically again to some truly fascinating and unexpected scientific insights, particularly in biology and health. These are findings that really challenge some of our basic assumptions about life. First up, groundbreaking research that has completely changed how scientists view the cognitive abilities of insects, specifically bumblebees.
Yes, this is absolutely fascinating work. Researchers conducted studies demonstrating that bumblebees can actually learn a simplified form of Morse code.
Morse code? Bumblebees. How?
Well, they train the bees to associate different patterns of light flashes, short flashes versus long flashes with the presence or absence of a sugary treat reward. And the bees learn to differentiate between these abstract patterns.
They learn to read light patterns. What does that imply about their brains, which are obviously tiny compared to ours?
It implies they possess far more sophisticated neural processing capabilities than we previously gave them credit for. They're not just simple stimulus response machines. This ability to learn abstract patterns challenges the long-held idea that complex cognitive abilities are solely dictated by brain size or having a complex neocortex like mammals. Bumblebees are demonstrating abstract learning, forcing scientists to rethink intelligence and cognition across the entire biological spectrum. Even tiny brains can be capable of complex tasks.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Now, moving to medical science, specifically oncology, there's exciting progress being made using one of the rarest naturally occurring elements on Earth.
Yes, we're talking about astatine, specifically the isotope astatine-211. It's incredibly rare. The total amount present in the Earth's crust at any one time is estimated to be less than a gram.
Less than a gram on the whole planet. How could it be used in medicine then?
It has to be produced artificially in particle accelerators, but researchers are exploring its immense potential in a type of cancer treatment called targeted alpha particle therapy, or TAT.
Targeted alpha therapy. How does that work?
When astatine-211 decays, it emits alpha particles. Alpha particles are relatively heavy and carry a lot of energy, but they travel only a very short distance in tissue, maybe just a few cell diameters. The idea behind TAT is to attach astatine-211 atoms to molecules, like antibodies, that specifically target and bind to cancer cells. When the astatine decays right at the tumor site, the emitted alpha particles deliver an extremely localized, highly lethal dose of radiation directly to the cancer cells, while sparing the surrounding healthy tissue because the radiation doesn't travel far.
So like a tiny targeted radiation bomb just for the tumor cells.
Exactly. It offers the potential for a highly effective, personalized cancer treatment with significantly fewer side effects than traditional, less targeted radiation therapies. It could be a revolution in how we treat certain cancers if the challenges of production and delivery can be fully overcome.
And staying with potential medical revolutions, this time in treating psychiatric disorders. Scientists have made a breakthrough working with mice and anxiety.
Yes, they successfully inhibited the activity of a specific gene in mice that has been linked to heightened anxiety responses.
How did they inhibit the gene? And what happened?
They used molecular techniques to reduce the expression of this gene, specifically within the amygdala, a key region of the brain known as the fear and anxiety center. And the result was a noticeable reduction in anxiety-like behaviors in the mice. They became less fearful in stressful situations.
What are the potential implications for humans?
This research opens up really promising new therapeutic avenues for treating anxiety disorders in humans. It suggests that by targeting the underlying genetic and biological pathways involved in anxiety, rather than just treating the symptoms with medication, we might develop more effective and lasting treatments. It even raises the possibility, perhaps further down the line, that gene editing techniques like CRISPR could potentially play a role in correcting gene variations that predispose individuals to severe anxiety disorders. It's early days, but a very exciting direction.
And one more piece of fascinating health research, showing an unexpected crossover between diseases. Research found that drugs normally used for cancer therapy might help with Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, this is potentially huge. The research showed that two specific drugs, typically used in cancer treatment, were able to reverse certain gene expression modifications, epigenetic changes that are known to be linked to the pathology of Alzheimer's disease in cellular models.
Reversing gene expression changes linked to Alzheimer's.
Exactly. This is significant because most current Alzheimer's treatments focus on managing symptoms or clearing protein plaques after they've formed. This research suggests a different approach, targeting and potentially reversing the underlying epigenetic changes that contribute to the disease's progression before the damage becomes widespread.
So shifting from symptom management to tackling the root cause at a genetic level.
That's the potential implication. If drugs, even existing ones developed for other purposes like cancer, can effectively target and reverse these harmful gene expression patterns associated with Alzheimer's, it could offer an entirely new and possibly transformative therapeutic strategy for this devastating disease. #4. Legacies, sports, and culture.
Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive today with a look at how legacies are being defined and preserved in sports, in art, and even in pop culture. In the world of football, or soccer as it's known in some parts, an undeniable era is officially drawing to a close.
Yes, Cristiano Ronaldo, the iconic Portuguese forward, arguably one of the greatest players of all time, has confirmed that the 2026 FIFA World Cup will be his final international tournament. That World Cup is being jointly hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. His announcement marks the approaching end of a truly legendary career, one defined by incredible goal-scoring records, numerous trophies, and just immense global fame and influence over the sport for nearly 2 decades.
The end of an era, indeed. And as one era ends, fans are looking towards the future of the game itself, proposing changes.
That's right. There's ongoing discussion among fan groups about ways to improve the sport, particularly around officiating and technology. Reports highlighted 5 significant changes being proposed by supporters. These included ideas like implementing the video assistant referee (VAR) system for reviewing all potentially contentious decisions, not just certain types of incidents. And another interesting one was an in-game penalty challenge system, perhaps similar to what you see in tennis or cricket, where teams get a limited number of challenges to officiating decisions.
So fans are pushing for more fairness and consistency through technology.
Largely, yes. They seem to want to harness technology to correct clear officiating errors and ensure greater fairness, while also trying to find ways to do it that minimize disruption to the flow of the game, which is always a tricky balance with VAR.
Now shifting to cultural preservation in the art world. A rather heartwarming story involving the legacy of Bob Ross.
Ah, yes, the painter of Happy Little Trees. 3 original paintings by the late, great Bob Ross were recently auctioned off, fetching over $600,000.
$600,000 for Bob Ross paintings. That's significant. Where's the money going?
And this is the lovely part. The proceeds are going directly to support public television stations in the U.S. It ensures that his enduring legacy, built on those gentle landscapes and soothing voice that first reached audiences via public broadcasting, continues to financially support the very community television that made him a beloved household name.
It feels like a very fitting outcome.
It really does. On the flip side of preservation, sometimes modern cultural landmarks, even fictional ones, face threats. There's a building in Edinburgh, Scotland, facing potential demolition.
Yes, Argyle House. It's a rather imposing, some might say brutalist, office block. But it gained a new kind of fame recently because it was used as the filming location for the police headquarters in the popular Netflix crime series Dept Q.
So a building known from a TV show might be torn down.
Potentially. It sparked quite a lively debate in Edinburgh. On one side, you have cultural preservationists and fans of the show arguing that the building now has modern architectural and cultural significance, partly thanks to its role in the series. On the other side, you have urban developers and potentially the city council looking towards modernizing that part of the city center, arguing the building is outdated or doesn't fit future plans. It's that classic clash between preserving elements of recent cultural history, even pop culture history, and the pressures of urban economic development and renewal.
Interesting dilemma. And finally, let's end with a quick pop culture check-in on one of the most enduring animated franchises of all time, Toy Story.
Yes, the trailer for the upcoming Toy Story 5 apparently dropped recently.
Toy Story 5. What terrors do Woody and Buzz face this time?
Slight chuckle.
Well, according to reports on the trailer, this time our familiar heroes, Woody and Buzz Lightyear, encounter and are depicted as being absolutely terrified by a sleek, modern, high-tech tablet computer.
Terrified of a tablet. Apparently so. Which is actually quite relatable, isn't it? Even in a world populated by talking toys who've been to space and back, the smooth, cold, inscrutable complexity of a modern smart device can still represent a kind of technological leap that feels genuinely alien, maybe even a little intimidating, especially to those, like Woody, from a simpler technological era. A bit of commentary on our own relationship with ever-evolving tech, perhaps. #outro.
Wow. Okay, what a truly dizzying synthesis we've navigated today. We've covered everything from the incredibly dark documentation of alleged war crimes and political repression, all the way to the genuinely exhilarating potential of traveling between stars at 20% the speed of light.
We really stand the spectrum. We saw the deep political instability that can be caused by corruption, like the Energoatom scandal in Ukraine. We saw systemic failures laid bare, like the accidental release of dozens of prisoners in the UK due to simple errors. And we touched on the enormous economic friction being created by that staggering wealth inequality we discussed, and the potentially looming crisis in the commercial real estate sector.
But then, juxtaposed right against all that human dysfunction, all that struggle, is this pure world-altering potential. Those laser-powered light sails, designed by AI, that could, theoretically, propel a probe, maybe one day even humans, towards Alpha Centauri within our lifetimes.
And the threads really connect, I think, when you step back and look at the fundamental hurdles. Humanity's ability to actually achieve something as monumentally complex and resource-intensive as interstellar travel, well, it relies entirely on us maintaining a reasonably stable, functional, cooperative, and well-organized global civilization. Yet that very civilization, as we've discussed today, is currently threatened. Threatened by the escalating climate crisis, threatened by deep economic instability driven partly by that massive inequality, and threatened by the internal political conflicts and information wars, like the battles involving President Trump and institutions like the BBC.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener, trying to make sense of it all? It seems the urgent political conflicts, the climate emergency, the economic strains we detail today, these are ultimately the immediate critical hurdles humanity has to clear. We have to navigate these terrestrial challenges before we can realistically grasp that breathtaking potential waiting for us out there in space.
It feels a bit like we're still fighting the battles of the last century, using the tools and facing the consequences of the 21st, while simultaneously dreaming of the 23rd century.
Which leaves us, I think, with a really provocative final thought for you to consider. Mull this over.
We seem to know, or are rapidly figuring out, the technical ingredients needed to achieve truly incredible things like developing propulsion systems capable of 20% the speed of light. We're on the verge of solving immense engineering problems. Yet simultaneously, we seem utterly unable to agree on the fundamental political and ethical blueprints required to simply ensure that $4 billion in already allocated food assistance actually reaches hungry families during a domestic crisis here on Earth.
So the question is, which of those challenges, the complex technical realization of the interstellar drive, or the seemingly straightforward political resolution of the SNAP dispute, tells us more about the true state of human progress right now?
Which one of those races, the race to the stars or the race to basic human decency and effective governance, represents the real point of no return that we are currently speeding towards?
Something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.